Hello guys and welcome. So we're going to talk about the technical specs of the Wii U. So why would I make this video? Well, a lot of people are being confused by some of the details out there, and some people do not really get the full picture as to why the Wii U is just so bad for like AAA games that were ported at launch on the Wii U. So I want to really show the people why the Wii U failed in this regard, and why also Nintendo made the decisions that it made for the Wii U, at least from a hardware perspective. So the Wii U CPU is essentially a power PC with three cores, clocked at 1.24 gigahertz, and it was designed for Nintendo by IBM. So you couldn't find this PowerPC processor anywhere else. It was actually Nintendo that specifically requested this design for them. Now, why did Nintendo do that? Well, they actually wanted to keep backwards compatibility with the Wii, and they took like a no risk approach to it. So they didn't really try to add new features to the CPU. They did add multiple cores. So what the Wii U CPU basically is they took the Wii's own CPU, which was clocked at 729 megahertz, and that CPU was itself an overclocked variant of the GameCube. So what the Wii U did was they took that, they increased the clock speed up to 1.24 gigahertz. They basically tripled it, so three cores, and they also added L2 cache to it, and that's all there is to it. So we don't have stuff like Altivec, for instance. There's nothing. It's literally just like the Wii CPU. The only big difference is like the L2 cache and the frequency bump. That's really what makes the Wii U faster than the previous generation, but otherwise it's not a huge leap. And in fact, when you compare it against the Xbox 360, it is quite obvious that the clock speed is much slower than the Xbox 360. And that forces developers to essentially either cut back on features, or they can try to rely on the GPU. So stuff like GPU. So basically what this means is that they will try to run game code on the GPU. But the issue with that is that when you do that, you can also hurt performance for stuff that could be allocated to other graphical effects. So it's kind of like a trade-off. And most developers didn't do like GPU operations anyway, because it's just something that they were not used to doing. Besides like Nvidia's PhysX at the time, but that was only on PC. On consoles, they either did stuff like relying on the PS3's SPU, and even that was very uncommon among games. So unfortunately, this meant that the Wii U was a very poor fit for actual AAA games of the time. And when the big corpos noticed like the game sold poorly, they just moved on to the next generation. So yeah, that kind of hurt like the core gamer audience. And in fact, we have the comments from the one of the programmers for Mass Effect 3, and he essentially said that even stuff like code for PowerPC processors, they were not always a good fit for the Wii U's CPU, because the Xbox 360 CPU was an out of order CPU, whereas the Wii U CPU was a superscalar core. So that means the tricks that would work on the Xbox 360 would actually be slower on the Wii U. And not only that, but there's just stuff that would outright not work. So stuff like Altivec is just not present on the Wii U. On the Wii U, it doesn't work out. It's not compatible, despite the fact that it is PowerPC. Because essentially the Wii U uses a design that dates all the way back to 2001. And what Nintendo did was take this design, increase the frequency, and add L2 cache to it. And that's just so bizarre. But Nintendo felt that CPU power didn't matter because they changed their focus from the core gamer audience to like the casuals. Unfortunately for them, they made a bad bet because the casual gamers were also moving on to like iPhones and Android and stuff like that. So they lost that huge chunk of the market as well. So why Nintendo stuck with this design despite knowing all of that? So as I said earlier, they wanted to keep backwards compatibility with the Wii, but that's not the only reason why. The other reason is, and they said this to other developers at a conference, they wanted to their console to consume as little power as possible and for it to make as little noise as possible. And that essentially forces Nintendo to limit the TDP to around 12 watts. Now you could say, well, sure, maybe Nintendo could improve things further by using a 28 nanometer process. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, maybe like corporate politics, they actually used 55 nanometer from like another Japanese company called Renaissance. And yeah, that means that they could not reduce like the power consumption further, or they could not like at least increase the CPU frequency much further. So yeah, and they also did not add stuff like Altivec to the CPU core because Nintendo took a no risk approach and they wanted the console to be entirely backwards compatible with the Wii. And all of this hurt the Wii U's performance, sadly. It explains why games perform so poorly on the Wii U compared to the Xbox 360. It is that bad, the CPU. I did not realize this at first, but I thought that the Wii U CPUs was more efficient per cycle. But even if that was the case, compared to the Xbox 360's CPU, it is still the CPU clock is too low to compensate for that. So it really doesn't matter. But let's talk about the other aspect of the Wii U, so the GPU. So it actually comes with a Terascale based GPU from AMD. It is capable of shader code and GPU, which is something that the Wii GPU could not do. But that GPU was still thermal throttle, so to around 15 watts. Could be more, but it is around 15 watts. And the clock speed of it is just over 500 megahertz. And the interesting thing is that, well, if you actually overclock the GPU to around or to almost like 700 megahertz, the guy who tested that the overclock, he actually noticed a significant performance boost in Zelda Breath of the Wild, which goes to show that some games that we thought were CPU bound were actually GPU bound as well. It's worth noting though that overclocking your GPU does increase the TDP, and you will need to change like not only your thermal paste and but also increase the fan speed if you don't want your console to cook itself to death, which explains one of the reasons why Nintendo did not want to go with like a more powerful design because it would have required a better cooler than what the Wii U actually uses. Because of that, and the thermal throttle, even even in the best case scenario, even if the CPU could keep up with the GPU, against the Xbox One and the PS4, it still wouldn't have been good enough. And the other reason is would simply, I mean, the RAM. There would simply have not been enough RAM for a Wii U game to look like an Xbox One game, because the Xbox One came with like 8 GB, but the Wii U only came with like 2 GB, and 1 GB is used for games. The other gigabyte is used for apps, so stuff like web browsers. And I honestly believe that this memory model was misguided. They should have reserved a bigger chunk of the memory for games and leave a smaller portion for apps. On the 3DS, they actually did offer a separate memory mode, and this memory mode actually allocates like three-fourths of the memory to games and apps that cannot fit inside of that small chunk of the memory. Well, basically, if the user attempts to run such an app, it will basically force close the game and do it that way. I'm not honestly sure why Nintendo did not implement something like that on the Wii U. That's why I said it was a misguided solution, but it didn't matter, to be honest, anyway. But because most games, due to the other limitations, they did not encounter RAM issues. That would not have been a very common limitation. Maybe for like a very unoptimized Unity free game, but yeah, I don't believe that that's the case. So anyway, that was a quick overview of the Wii U specs. So I hope that gave you sort of a better idea of why the Wii U games performed so badly. So thank you for watching and bye.